All right, good afternoon. This is the 1:15 session, the interactive workshop, discussion among all attendees. If I could have folks in the room take your seats, and we will begin. We have discussion leaders, Julie Cubb from NTIA-ITS, assisted by Elozio de Silva from Commonwealth Cyber Initiative at Virginia Tech, and please take it away.
All right, welcome. Welcome to the session. Hope everybody had a nice lunch. So I cherry-picked this session for myself because, of course, it's very important. It's the heart of what we're discussing is how do we get to consistent, repeatable international testing? And we've heard a lot this morning already about some of the different parts of it, but we're going to dive even deeper into this session. We have things such as, how do we do resilience testing? Breakout sessions. We have what testing do MNOs want? We've heard a lot in ORAN Alliance about performance parity, use case testing, MVP, that type of thing. How can we achieve and demonstrate consistent, repeatable testing? How do you kind of know when you've gotten there is very important. How accurate do tests need to be, and how large of differences are significant? The fifth breakout session will be what test frameworks and automation are needed. That's very important, and it saves a lot of manual effort to have that automation and test frameworks and to achieve that consistency. And then, of course, there's this whole topic on data. How can we gather, sanitize, maintain test data both on the input and the output side? So I think Elozio and I really liked how the last session worked, where people just kind of came to the mic and talked about some of the ideas they have. So I think we'd like to open it up. After Elozio, did you have any additional comments you wanted to make before we open it up?
No, I think you said it all.
Okay, excellent. Oh, yeah, the mic is in the middle there. You can line up there. Is it on?
Are you open to questions if you don't have ideas? So in the breakout session on accuracy, what do you have in mind? Accuracy of what? And does that imply that there's some ground truth somewhere? I ask as the person
Yeah, you're asking.
who's chairing.
You're asking for a friend.
I'm asking for a friend. You might have to explain this soon.
Yeah, so do people have ideas about, what we should think about with test data and accuracy? Is it also how to gather this from MNOs? Can we scrub it so that it can be real data? I know with AI/ML, sometimes you can create artificial data to have enough data sets, but how do you know you have enough training data and that type of thing? When you're looking at outputs, how many decimal points of precision do you actually need to say that it's repeatable? You need some sort of, precision to know what that is. And so I think that's what we're going to be talking about in your breakout sessions. I'll be interested to hear what you find out. Are there other ideas that people have or things that they're thinking about for the different breakout sessions? I think the accuracy does kind of tie in to, so that's session 4, to, how do we gather, sanitize, and maintain test data? Because you need to know how accurate it's going to be before you kind of figure out what the data is. And also, I'm kind of wondering for session 6, who's going to maintain it? Does it have to be a neutral body like a government? And especially on the international front, how do you, who's going to gather it? Who's going to maintain it? How do you ensure that it's confidential? That type of thing.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that this is a very important section because we will be dealing here mainly with the data, the result of the test, right? Then what is the meaning of consistency? Is consistency and repeatable working together, or they are two different subjects? One is depend of the another one or not, right? How you maintain the consistency, right? Then when we are talking about tests across worldwide in a laboratory that is located, for example, in US, and another laboratory that may be located in Philippines or in Europe, can we guarantee that we have consistency? Can we make a test case that has been done here in a specific setup or repeatable and get the same result in Europe? What are the challenges? What are the gaps that we have? And what are the questions that we need to find answers for?
Yeah, Karsten?
Yes, Carsten from ENTC. So actually our breakout from the I14Y lab will have 2 of the 3 adjectives there covered. So I don't want to start before we start, but just another thought on the consistency and repeatability. What we need is transparency of the configurations, and we need clear specifications. That was also a topic in some of the morning breakout sessions already. So you can only have consistent testing and repeatable testing if you agree on how it's configured and if you agree on what are the metrics to be configured and observed. And I think that's a call not only for the SDOs to create more detailed standards, to remove these vague open points that often vendors have brought in, no blame, but that's their job, to keep things open and to find their way in an industry. And also to help the labs, us, to really push for disclosure of the data, of the results data. And that's often a problem, especially in the very political mobile market. The vendors don't want the results to be published. They only want thumbs up. That's what they want us labs to say, like, oh, wonderful product, passed the certification, no questions asked. But actually, 2 certifications of the same type, even in the ORAN Alliance today, are not comparable because a vendor can select how to run the test, which test cases to select. They can declare non-support of a certain feature. Maybe even if they support it, they declare non-support to circumvent the test cases. And none of this is being published. In the ORAN Alliance, other operators may request access to the detailed report, but only the operators are allowed to do it under NDA, not the peer reviewers, which would be the best, their competitors and the vendors. And B, the reports are not standardized, so it's sometimes very hard to figure out how the tests were actually done. I'm an auditor in the Telecom Infra project, and we have the TIP group has a neutral body to review and audit these test reports. But even for us, it's hard sometimes to look through the different styles of reports. So enough said, transparency on results and also more detailed specifications on how to define the configurations. Thank you.
Okay, and I also heard peer review and standard output reports, so you can actually compare, in addition to the transparency and clear specs and metrics. So that could be something to feed back to TIP and ORAN Alliance.
Yeah, and also you touched on a very important point that we have been discussing in the other events before, mainly inside the ORAN Summit. That is how we can work together with the vendors to really share the data testing after the test. Because just sharing pass and fail is not enough, right? And then I think if we can share some of the data tests, it will make the market a little bit more competitive as well in terms of which vendors the carriers will choose or trust.
I'm kind of wondering if this idea that you just mentioned and Karsten just mentioned about pushing labs for disclosure of data, is there anything that the policy folks could maybe help us with that? Is there any sort of incentives? Is there any sort of agreements? Or vendors will just not want it because, they don't want to disclose if they did poorly in a test or something like that?
Well, maybe it will be the case for the policy group to establish policies and enforce these policies.
Yeah.
Right, to guarantee.
I'm kind of curious too on, you mentioned the challenges and the gaps, and I especially, if anybody's here from the Plug Fest that did the talk yesterday, because you guys actually did the consistent repeatable testing in 2 different locations. And I would be curious kind of hear the challenges and the gaps and maybe what some of those folks think about this topic. What's missing? Is there missing in definition of what we're trying to do with consistent repeatable? I know we heard from Koo some of the, the cabling and the hardware and the workforce development. But if you, besides some of the things you mentioned yesterday, there's other things that you might be able to share or ways forward that we could, how did you actually decide that it was consistent and repeatable when you were doing the test? Oh, there's Michele.
Okay, I'll take the last part. So the consistent part was on, are we testing the same interface from the same product using the same set of test specifications at the same version number and the same test cases? The repeatable was, we're doing it in 2 different labs. I think the summary that you made of what Ku also captured, those are the main challenges that we face, primarily aligning the configurations, aligning the capabilities. Just to give you an example now, what we are in the technical track, we face some issue in interoperating the RU simulator with the DU that we were testing, because we were using 2 different time references, so UTC and TIA, and we didn't realize it until a few days. So that was something that does not necessarily speaks to the consistency or repeatability, but it was a challenge in doing things across different time systems. Then on the more personal and operational side, coordinating at 12 time zones of differences, that was somewhat challenging, but solvable. I don't know if,
Yeah, and I do know you up-leveled your speech yesterday for policy folks, so if there's other technical details for this group, you could share that as well.
Yeah, in fact, hi, this is Ku from Keysight. So in fact, Julie, yourself, Lauriston, Kate, and Margaret, you're part of the journey. Initially, when we created the slides, right, the first version, we got like 50 slides, and Julie's like, wow, 50 slides, right? You're going to put everyone to sleep. So there were more technical details that we wanted to share with the team, and obviously there are things like, for example, even the selection of the test cases, right? Things like, for example, conditional, mandatory. How do you make sure that you always select the right set of test cases? In the case of, for example, GCF, my understanding is that GCF is Global Certification Forum, basically for device testing. You would basically upload a file that basically includes, like, for example, what the device is actually able to support. And from the GCF server, you'll be able to get back a set of test cases that you got to pass, right? So those control mechanisms, they are centralized. In the case of ORAN right now, I think especially when we look at RU-DU conformance, the test cases are basically self-selected, right? So I think we go down basically to the basics in terms of like across 2 labs, are we selecting the right set of test cases together for the same device under test, like NEC Massive MIMO radio, which was actually shipped from Japan to Singapore and then back to Japan. And then having engineers basically to travel from Singapore to Japan to observe how the labs are basically getting set up and stuff like that, and having engineers from Japan to visit Singapore labs to make sure that things are actually being done correctly. And the other details that, obviously we'd like to share with the team, including things like the Misu-san shared some of this information in terms of the list of parameters that we need from the RU vendors. Right now, what's actually documented within the ORAN Alliance specs from the IoT profiles perspective, those are insufficient. So we have recognized the problem. I think so far, we do not yet have a good mechanism, I would say, within ORAN Alliance to be able to capture some of this information, like, for example, the calibration, right, in terms of, so the ORAN Alliance specified test cases, test procedures. Obviously, there's going to be room for improvement, like we read test case differently, so there's a problem in terms of precision, right? That's the first thing. So high quality test cases, which are consistent, repeatable, are needed. A few of us were basically involved in the RCOP project. We've actually went through the TIFG end-to-end test specs together. We read the same test cases, but our understanding are different. I think this shows that there are areas of the test cases which are needing to be improved so that everyone can actually read it the same and it can be reproducible. Because that will basically cascade into things like test automation, test scripts, writing and all those things, right? So I would say, I think there are quite a few things that we can discuss and it needs to be maybe addressed within ORAN Alliance or other forums, including, like, for example, the calibration guides, right? The other aspects of consistent repeatable testing is that we have a multiple, I think it's actually quite interesting because between the testing done between Singapore OTIC and Japan OTIC, we had the same device under test, which is the NZ radio, so there's no change to the radio units. In the case of the joint testing between Northeastern and Singapore OTIC, I think there are some variations. So when we look at consistent repeatable testing as well, we could look at the device under test. What are the differences? Right, because it's not the same. So we tried different combinations, and I think that helps us to expand a little bit in terms of our visibility into potentially what worked and what did not work. But again, we can try to compile a more detailed report, then we can share this with the team and see where the information potentially may flow. Okay.
Oh, so you're going to do a more detailed report from the Plugfest? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we can do that. In fact, we provided some of this, or the team has actually provided some of this information in the Plugfest readout slides. But obviously, we are given limited time as well, right? So I think the team will be more than happy. Again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the team, but there are more that we can try to share with the entire industry.
Oh, great. Okay. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it will be interesting to, as an output from these sections, based on what you said, that we may, it would be nice to have some recommendations. What is the best approach to do the selections of the test case, right? There is any metric and approach that allow me to select what is the best test case that I should go for.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it may be, well, I think we don't have to solve the challenge here or the problem here, but I think one of the recommendations is see how we can try to solve this in ORAN Alliance. For example, in terms of like maybe coming up with a standardized set of selection criteria, scripts and stuff like that, that we can try to include in the appendix of the test specs. That could be one way to do it. And again, we know that many of us here work in ORAN Alliance. We know that the working group for test specs are not the only test specs, right? They basically require selection of the right set of test cases. Other working group test specs basically would have the similar sort of requirements as well. So I think maybe that's one area that we got to look at, yeah.
Thanks, Koo. Hi, Bin.
Hi, Ping from Singapore University of Technology and Design. I'd just like to bring up 3 points. The first, I'd like to echo Carsten's the point about transparency. I think that is really a key factor that help we did this repeatable consistent testing between Japan OTIC and Singapore OTIC, as well as between Northeastern OTIC and us. Really, we have shared a lot about all the details. I mean, we open book about how we did this test procedures. All this, as I mentioned, actually we learn a lot when the result is not consistent in the first place. Then we need to go down and see where is the problem. Then we see, we compare all the details and we see, oh yeah, maybe the software version, maybe it's the cable length. So this is really where the transparency, not to avoid like there's some problem there, but we say, oh yeah, there's a problem. Let's try to open our book and figure out what is the cause. Yeah, so that's the first point. And I think the transparency in terms of the inputs, configurations, some vendor-specific parameter setting, as well as outputs. We are not free to share that. Yeah, this doesn't pass in the first try, or maybe the performance is not as we expected. So also with the support from vendor, I think we are at least between the two labs, we are very transparent to each other. And I think potentially we can also be transparent to the larger community as well. So this is the first point I'd like to make. The second point I think is also I think in the breakout session 6, I think we can go much deeper. It's like there are a lot of different types of data. Some of these are probably not so sensitive, so probably it's easier to make it transparent. But some of the data, maybe for example the AI, ML, some data involve real world traffic patterns. All these can be sensitive. So I think maybe through this workshop we can probably do a first dive to try to classify different types of data, input, the outputs that we need to deal with, and what are some of the consideration that different kind of treatment. So it's probably very difficult because there are so different type of data. It's difficult to say we can share or cannot share. We need to really go down to the detail. So hopefully we can make some first steps in this direction in this today's workshop. And the third point I'd like to bring to the discussion is it's really about the culture, right? It's whether our OT community can form a culture that we are very willing to collaborate and share. As long as there's no other for example, privacy or some other regulation constraints. So if we have the culture that we are just open up, like share, and we know all this sharing will enable the whole community to make progress. Of course, I mean, maybe a few years later, when many of us need to like really kind of make our budget, I mean, make the money, the two ends meet, then we probably will need to really worry about the business model. But now we are in a phase that we need to make the whole community successful first. So I think we need to build up this culture. And of course, I guess we can get support from our policymakers. Maybe, for example, they can loosen some of the unnecessary constraints once they share data. So I think that's hopefully when they're just in the same venue, I think that's maybe something we can try to give some recommendations. Yeah, these are the 3 points I like to make.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because you took a lot of advantage, Bin, of Rakuten Mobile coming over and helping you out. So I would be interested to hear from Mitsu because, Mitsu was actually helping out you. What is, I can clearly see the benefit of the lab getting the help. But what's, how is the, Mitsu, so when you, sorry to have him skip the line, but I'm curious, how did you get Rakuten Mobile to say, yes, we'd like to make this investment in helping Singapore? What was in it kind of for Rakuten Mobile, and what's the benefit for the group doing that help?
This is Mitsu from the Rakuten Mobile as the Japan Audit. At this time, we can easily help the Singapore audit because before Singapore audit, the execute the repeated testing, we already complete. So if we something the different test result, we easily recognize some of the gap. So in case of the Singapore audit, first we all deliver 7 DUT. DUT is the okay. Then we check the old software version of the equipment side. And everything the okay, then we doubt the physical part, cable length, and some of the gap, divide out or something. So this experience is maybe helpful for other audit. And another.
So are you saying that because you helped Singapore, you actually learned things yourself about your own testing?
Yes.
Oh, very interesting. Okay.
So I thought that I think that this kind of the knowledge sharing, actual the experience is quite helpful for audit. So whatever TIFG creates some the test cases, some audit should validate the test cases and also test system. So we always face the both test cases error and the system error. But if the some audit validates the both test cases and equipment side, we confident the system and test cases, and we easily to point out the vendor side. Vendor side always the doubt. This is environmental issue or the test case error or something. But some audit should validate as a neutral point of view. This is quite important.
Okay, so it's kind of like we talked in I-14Y about rising waters rises all ships. If we help each other, we're not always competitors. We sometimes can help each other and rise everybody up. So, okay, interesting. Sorry, Doug, to skip the line. Oh, I was just very curious after Bin talked. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Bin. Just a moment, Doug.
2 things I'd like to add. First, I really like to echo on what Mr. Zhang has said. Yeah, it's really very good at the current stage of the maturity level that different labs can just validate each other's finding and to kind of share the findings. So for example, like we are planning for issuing our next batch of, first batch of the certificate of badges. And we are really like to, if the vendor support, we are really like to open up what we have found and to get another lab to kind of do the independent kind of verification. So I think this is very important, especially for a new OT like us. The second thing I forgot to mention is that actually for the findings, we have kind of documented in 2 papers that we are going to publish in, I think, next month. This is a RETI workshop co-organized by Michael in an academic conference. So I think you can download them probably now or very soon in this IEEE Explore. So each 5-6 pages, but there are some technical details we kind of written there. So yeah, I encourage you to take a look at that. Thanks.
Yes, and I read that paper. I got to review it. It was very, very good.
So one thing I think we ought to think about and sort of keep separate is the notions and the activities that we would do as effectively a quality control and calibration program to, if the program we're talking about is, the testing done by OTICs, right? So we need to focus on that. We actually need to do things like interlab comparisons, test method validation, calibration, right, with known targets. I do think the relationship of vendors to test labs will always have, some restrictions on the sharing of data. And so you would hope that the calibration kind of activities amongst test labs would get you a good ways down the way of proficiency testing, test method validation, even looking at some issues of accuracies or differences between the same tests as an internal exercise, because we can do that. You don't have to convince a vendor to necessarily open the test results. On the other side, like I said, I think there'll always be a business relationship with certain restrictions on test results and configurations between test labs and product vendors. And rather than trying to tackle that kind of larger business problem, to focus on very specific internal calibration and quality kind of tests that we could do.
Yeah, which is really why I like this whole IORS, is because we have kind of the policy side and, there's some of these bigger issues of what can we share, how can we share, that policy people could maybe help us with. And I think as an engineer, it's a lot easier for me to tackle like the quality calibration, the technical issues. Those seem easier to me. But we do realize that policy people can help us succeed.
Also, it's interesting to note that maybe can be discussed in the other breakout section is that when we are doing this kind of cross OT centers testing, as the example that we saw today and yesterday, and when we are talking about consistent and repeatable, how you can guarantee that the labs that are involved in this cross lab testing, that they have the same understanding of the URAN specification in the test case. Because it was pointed out today early in the morning that the URAN specification is a little bit vague and people has different interpretations sometimes, right? What kind of approach we may take when we are collaborate together to do cross OT testing in such a way to guarantee that each lab that is participating of this cross has the same understanding of the test case, also the same understanding of the specifications, right? And what are the results that is expected in the end as well? Because if there is no this synergy, right, that they have the same understanding of the test and the specifications, then there is a gap, there is a problem that needs to be solved.
And I think that's like a recurring theme that we keep hearing today.
Yeah.
The test specs aren't consistent enough. There's too many tests to choose from. How do you know that, what you should be testing? So that's huge. And that goes back to what Ku said about, what can we feed back to ORAN Alliance, to TIP, to, other standards groups, ATIS, whatnot. Charles?
Hi, everyone. I'm Charles from Sonic Labs, and we have been doing Open Run testing since 2020. We have tested around 50 end-to-end Open Run systems, and I just wanted to make a few points regarding consistent, repeatable testing. The very first point is on the RIC side of things. So most of the RIC applications require lots of data to train the particular algorithm to do a particular task. The data is not available from the MNOs with real-world data. So what most labs are doing is use emulators like the one from Keysight and the one from Viavi. The challenge with that is how does that emulated data correlate to the real data? Because there will be a lot of gaps, and how does that impact the actual algorithms that are being created by the developers? So if we could have a way of having a correlation between the emulated data with real world data sets, of course, this requires collaboration from MNOs who have got this data. So that's the first point regarding the RIC testing in the RIC space. Regarding the testing of the CU, DU, RU components, I think TIFG has made a very good effort in defining the test cases and defining the procedures, defining the outcomes of that. What they haven't done is specify which test cases are applicable to a particular scenario. So most vendors, some vendors in Open Run create products for indoor environments, so all the outdoor aspects of the test become completely irrelevant to them. So it's specifying which of those test cases are relevant to a particular scenario. I think that would be helpful in making the test cases repeatable. We have taken some of those test cases as subsets for the different scenarios we have. And our tests are consistent, but the outcome is always not predictable. So the outcome is not repeatable because the products change. And the products change because it takes you about 6 months to run a proper test campaign. And within that 6 months, the vendors have done software upgrades and changes to the product that you initially started testing. So we would have to find a way of freezing the products, then testing and then retesting. So this whole concept of continuous testing and continuous integration, I think, should feed into how tests can be repeated across the labs. The final comment I would like to make is regarding the plug fests. The structure of the Oran plug fest at the moment is all essentially each OTIC that runs the plug fest decides the theme that they want to do, and they run with it with the partners that they've got. I think the plug fest would be a good mechanism for, first of all, making the labs collaborate regarding testing, but also enforcing, or at least trying to provide guidelines on which tests are relevant for a particular scenario. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of, so the data piece, I think session 6 will be really interesting to see what we come out with that. And we do keep kind of hearing about this test cases and what's relevant, how do you choose? There's so many to choose from. The continuous testing and the automation is very true. And I like your idea about the Plug Fest. I know they were trying in the last spring Plug Fest to kind of have these themes and to try to start getting labs to work together. And we saw some of that starting, but I agree, that is a good mechanism for lab collaboration. So excellent points. I don't know if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I also like what you point out about the data that they emulate data and the real data. The real data, all of us know that the carriers, they will never share, right? But if you consider that we have OTIC centers around the world today, that they have both in-lab setup where they can emulate and generate data set, but also they have in the field network infrastructure, a real network infrastructure, small scale, that we are capable to generate real data set, right? Then if you have a OTIC, for example, in Japan, that they only have a setup, the OTIC in the lab, but they would like to do the tasks that they have done inside of the lab, more realistic setup, they still can collaborate with other OTICs around the world that has a network infrastructure outside. There's such a way that they can generate the data and also they can validate the testing lab and outdoor. Because the majority of the time you do a test in the indoor environment, very controllable, you get some result. But when you go outdoor where things will really work, the result is totally different. Maybe you need to tweak something, you need to do some calibration, right?
Well, and that's how if labs collaborate, they can share that data and get indoor and outdoor data in different parts of the world. And that's another benefit for even those that are helping others, that their testing becomes more rigorous. Andreas?
Yeah, so one point concerning the repeatability and how we discuss it. To me, it looks it's a lot about learning and sharing learnings between the labs, and that makes it the other lab or the lab that runs the second test faster and better. So what I'm not so sure about is how do we use that learnings to feed it back to the test specifications. So because in the best case, repeatability means you take the test specification, take your components, run the tests in the lab, and it's done. So, and no matter whether it's in Europe, in US, or in Asia. So, and that is I think this kind of how we feed it back to the test specifications, that's not 100% clear to me. And a little bit advertisement, at table 3, we can discuss repeatability and consistent testing.
Yeah, that'll be a good session. I think I know the person who's doing that one.
Thank you.
Did you have anything to add on that? It is a good point about, how to feed it back, the feedback loop to the test specs.
Yeah, if you think in terms of there is two types of tests, right? The ones that we are doing today, basically is manual, is not automated. And we are targeting and envision to have a full end-to-end test framework that is completely automated. This automated framework, we envision as well that you need to receive data that can be generated across different test OTICs that can be shared, right? Then if I take my framework that is automated to your network infrastructure, I should take as well the data, right? You can use the same data that is used across of the world to do the same test. But the question mark is, will you be able to get the same result? Probably not, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Doug?
But I think the process of doing that is what's of value, right? I mean, it's a quality control mechanism to the testing infrastructure. So other programs that I run do interlab comparisons. We publish test targets, admittedly an easier technology realm. We provide the test targets, sometimes test targets that intentionally fail tests, sometimes test targets that will pass tests. We instruct the labs which sets of tests to run on those test targets, and they exchange test results and full packet traces of the test. And that actually ends up being reflective to a proficiency test, to whether the skilled personnel there are executing the test correctly. It ends up being a quality control measure on test methods, right? Did test system A emit a different test stream than test system B? There's no definitive result. You do have to process through these things and figure out where the differences are. And it also relates to reporting tests, right? We take the test results. Now you could raise the question, well, who will do all that work? So far in a frankly, a much smaller field of test labs, we require the labs themselves to effectively conduct the interlab comparison, to look at those data sets, figure out where the differences are and why. And sometimes that improves tests, sometimes it is a comment on the test, the test method platforms, sometimes it's a comment on how you fill out the test results.
Yeah, that's similar to what Karsten was saying about the peer review. And then I think you're extending it to say, well, maybe the peer review could be the labs themselves comparing. And I'm also wondering, since, with NIST, do you think that labs should be certified, like ISO certified or something like that? Or is that going too far, just do a more informal lab comparison?
The programs I'm referring to require ISO accreditation as a test lab. That is a very generic accreditation, right? You have to effectively define what the scopes of accreditation will be in your program and have auditors who, in some cases are third-party auditors, in some cases like crypto module validation. NIST is the accreditor and the auditor. So there are different models with different sort of cost complexity models and who bears the cost and complexity. The one program I was speaking about, we use third-party accreditation bodies, and the labs pay the accreditors to be accredited.
Okay, interesting. I don't know if you want to comment on that. No? Okay. Interesting, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Abdel from Telecom Infra Project, and I wanted to touch base on a few things on the test cases and their repeatability. So what we do in TIP when we came across that, our focus is on end-to-end solutions, performance testing, which include reliability, resilience, stress testing, etc. When we came across the concept of which test cases should come into these kinds of solutions, the test cases should be attached to a blueprint, and that blueprint would outline the architecture and the features of what kind of solution we're testing. So once we outline the features that we want to test, then the test plan would reflect upon that. I just wanted to share one of the projects that we're working on. It's the macro centralized CU centralized project that have Vodafone, AT&T, and Dutch Telecom in it. And when we came to the defining the test cases, I think what was really important is not only do we have a test procedure and the expected results, but what's important is the success criteria. How do we say that that test case has actually passed? And as more information we have on the test criteria, the actual sharing of the raw data of the results becomes less important, because if the success criteria is defined well and outlines all of the different parameters that affects that success criteria, then it will be good enough for operators to say, yes, this ticks the box and we're happy with the test results. So an example from yesterday, from when it was mentioned that handovers sometimes fails with a block error rate of 20%, etc. So if that was outlined in the handover test case, then that would be a failure. So it wouldn't be up to the OTIC lab or the TIP authorized lab to subjectively say we're happy with this result. And when it comes to repeatability, how can we define a repeatability if we don't have a success criteria on it? So we would need to have a margin of error and say if it was in between that margin, then we would accept that it's repeatable. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this issue was raised as well this morning in one of the breakout sections, right? Because if you get the URAN specification today, some of the tests, there is a very direct number there that say for some test case that pass or fail if you reach that number. But the other test case, they don't have any upper bound or lower bound, right? How, it will be interesting to hear from the breakout section today, how we can come up with this interval, right? This lower bound and upper bound. Because despite that URAN Alliance is saying that is 25 megabits per second is pass, right? But when you are talking about do consistent and repeatable tests, maybe one lab will get 22.8, right? Is it still accepted as fail or is pass, right? Who will be determine this? Maybe something that you guys need to discuss during the breakout sections as well.
Yeah, that might be the one that Doug is leading. You know, how accurate do you need to be? You know, to just have one number as opposed to a lower and upper bound might be much better criteria for some of these tests.
Yeah, and also maybe it's a question for the carriers that is here today, AT&T, Dish Network, Verizon, right? Mm-hmm. What is the number that is accepted for them? Right? We don't know today. We need to hear from the carriers as well.
That's a good point. And it might depend on what the test cases are too, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly, that's the point, because the first question is very easy for me as a lab. If I measure 22.8 and the minimum is 25, then it's a very clear fail. And I don't want to have any discussion with the test subject, you know, because that's actually what I'm depending on, but that's not what I wanted to say. The important part is to have the use case requirements, and I think the carriers, rightfully so, have a very hard time figuring out generic use case requirements. Probably there's not going to be one single number of 25, because it differs greatly if you're a telecom and you want to have an RFP for a macro cell, or if you're maybe a mall operator and you have a small cell indoor in a campus network, you know, or whatever other kind of different use case. So, but anyway, couple of things. So you said previously, automated testing is a dream. I don't agree. We already do fully automated testing. And also we've run other programs not related to ORAN at ENTC, where we did peer review between the labs, so particularly with UNH-IOL with the University of New Hampshire. But it's very time consuming. It takes a lot of resources. Somebody needs to pay for those resources.
Yes.
And so that's a problem, you know, the vendors and especially the consumers of the certifications, the operators here, need to value that and need to understand that the program has value. This means effort which in turn means cost. And I think that's a learning curve we have to go through for the lab peer review. Otherwise, I think it's good. On accreditation, I think the US domestic market for ISO 17000 accreditation is very different from the international market. In Germany, for example, I'm obliged to go through a government subsidiary. There is no market for accreditors, auditors. And I'm not sure what the value of this accreditation will be other than like an ISO 9000 style review of paperwork. So I think we need to make up our minds ourselves as experts. What do we want in kind of technical review? As Doug has said, we need to set the guidelines. And then again, ISO 17000 accreditation means very different amounts of money for labs based on different geographical regions. I don't know how it's in Singapore or Japan, but in Germany, because there's only one government subsidiary, it means a solid 5-digit amount of money for us to accredit for ORAN, any kind of ORAN thing. And then maybe we only get an accreditation for one area, and then when the next test plan comes up, we need to accredit again, and the government will happily take more money from us. So it's a little bit difficult. The final thing is how to manage the test lab market, because if we think we all help each other, I'm a big fan of that, but we also need to understand in the end the labs need to make money, they need to charge for testing at some point. I mean, there is up to now there is always one geographical area where the government is spending lots of money and we don't need to think about it. But at some point we need to make this a working market. And it's important not to distort it. So if I share something in good faith and help other labs start up, and then the government of, I don't know, name any country, comes to the great idea that now they really want to push their national labs market, and they basically offer everything for free, I have no basis of competing with all my knowledge against a free service. And if I have open sourced everything and shared everything and helped the labs to ramp up, then it's very insecure business model. So I encourage us all to look at the next stage of the quality assurance, how to create a market that actually works and does not result in either a monopoly or in a dominance of somebody who is currently government funded and can provide free services.
I think, Julie, the accreditation piece that he mentioned, maybe we should get some insights from the policy, right?
Yeah, especially since some countries, it sounds like, charge a lot for this type of thing. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Hi, this is Ku at Keysight. So 2 comments. First comment as a TFG co-chair. So within Test Integration Focus Group, we do actually have a suggestion to build a knowledge database. So this is basically for the labs to provide, inputs into potential areas like, for example, the issues they encounter during the plug fairs. How do we classify them? Not even during the plug fairs, but during your testing activities. So I think we're trying to get that work started. Maybe we need to do that promotion a little bit better, but we do actually have that initiative, right, sort of discussed. In fact, we just discussed this morning, 6 a.m. local time. So my second comment is from a Keysight perspective. I think potentially, ORAN Alliance Test Integration Focus Group could potentially use with a new work item to look at creating documents such as lab calibration or test bed calibration procedures, right? That we can basically have, imagine if you got a document that basically have different sections, right? For radio unit testing, front hall testing, you need to make sure that you check the cables, you got to do all these things, right? To make sure that your test bed is actually rock solid. You can even extend it to things like interlab comparison and all these things. You get a standard set of traffic profiles, for example, IQ samples to pump through the front hall traffic from an ODU emulator. This is what you expect to get, right? From a VSA perspective. I think those sort of things would be basic, right? Because right now, Test Integration Focus Group, mainly we look at obviously coordinating the test integration strategy across ORAN Alliance. We develop the end-to-end test specs. But I think we need to maybe look at going the next level down, right? How do you run the test cases? You need to make sure that the test beds are calibrated depending on the device under test, the test targets, right? And other things. Thank you.
Okay, and that's again that feedback loop, that we're trying to get out of these, what we're doing here to bring back to ORAN Alliance and other groups. Yes, great. Doug?
You know, it's certainly true. If you add more quality control and rigor to a program, it is going to cost more to either be accredited or to go through the interlab comparisons and that sort of thing. And this all gets all the way back to the ecosystem here. My general impression of ORAN Alliance testing, OTICs, and Plugfest so far is it's what I would call market development testing. Just trying to demonstrate a level of maturity of a new set of technologies across the market. Eventually, to have people, require testing of their vendors, you need to couple that to the acquisition side, for lack of a better word. I mean, certainly some programs I'm familiar with, we stood up testing and it was available. But what started vendors going for tests was training a user base to write RFPs that required submission of a test result and to specify which optional features of the protocol they want demonstrated testing. And that ends the conversation, right? Is if you want to bid on that RFP, you test those features, not only do we guide them, actually, in some cases, there are federal acquisition regulations. You must get a test result from an accredited lab. And that sort of, completes the circle on the economic model, right? Is no vendor wants to go to a lab and be tested, frankly, in general, I think. When you allow the vendors to opt into the tests, they'll test them sort of the minimal profile necessary to get a badge or a certificate. It's only when you can have it be of value to the acquisition side, right? The demand side, that you have to test these set of features and you have to do it in an accredited lab, then you kind of get to a sustainable model.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because we've talked about that before. Maybe that's something we can bring to the policy. One of the things we've talked about before is for private networks such as DoD, which is I think a smaller, like 5 or 10% of the market for Open RAN compared to enterprise networks. That sort of thing you could have government policy around, but you'd have to convince MNOs that they would want it with their RFPs. And I think, and that's the much bigger market. And could you do a government mandate for that? I don't know if that would be very popular in America with our free economy. Maybe some countries you could do, maybe it depends on the country, but it is an interesting point. But I have not seen it get traction yet. So, and it has brought up multiple times. So I'm not quite sure. I don't know what you think about that. Nothing? Okay.
But I just want to touch on a point here because I think several people brought at least the 3 people that has spoken before about the cost, right? If you add quality assurance, quality control, and the OTIC centers, of course, we will be an increase in the cost, right? And by the market process that work, this cost need to be charged in such a way, right? And the way to retrieve this cost will be the OTIC is providing testing as a service, right? Then they need to charge for the service. And this come out today in the morning as well on the breakout sections, right? The new OTIC that is coming, they don't know how much they're gonna go to charge for the test, right? Then can we get some discussions towards to this as well in such a way that, for example, the OTICs that is today well established, right? That is already providing the certification or badge. How much they charge in such a way that we can provide some guidance? Because if not, if I am a OTIC, you come to my lab and I say, okay, I will charge you for 3 weeks to do a conformity test, and I will need 2 engineers. I'm gonna need this A, B, C, D site test equipment, and the cost will be 50K, right? But then we have another laboratory that the cost will be different. And then, of course, you need to take the balance about, this laboratory here is providing the quality assurance, that has quality control, then you make your choice. But it's something that you guys can discuss as well later in the breakout section.
Okay, and I'm just going to do a quick time check. We have about 4 minutes left.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just want to say
I'm
4 minutes
really
left.
not, I'm really not comfortable talking about cost of testing and stuff like that in an open forum like this. It violates basically every antitrust policy that I'm aware of ever. Like, I will have to leave.
Okay, you need to bring up the blue card.
You can't do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Hi,
Okay,
this is
so,
Venkat
yeah,
from
3 moments.
Radisys. So I want to touch upon the repeatability aspect of the test case for the conformance and interoperability cases. One example Mr. Koo has brought up about GCF certification for devices. So in case of devices, GCF forum gives the test scripts in terms of TTC, and the test tool vendors can download. He will not be able to change. He will not be able to alter the test scripts. He has to execute, and every test vendor has to mandatorily implement those test cases. So that way, the consistency will be achieved across all the test tools, because right now we are seeing that every test tool vendor is publishing ORAN test suite. We don't know what is implemented, and it is also up to their interpretation of those specs. So if there is a script which can be downloadable from ORAN Alliance, which is authenticated, which is approved by ORAN Alliance, so all the test tool vendors can implement the same.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, Doug, and then I think we'll be breaking. Yeah.
The idea of open source test method validation scripts is very appealing, which might address your concern. I just wanted to clarify one thing, is the examples I discussed before was the acquisition requirements was the federal government imposing those requirements on our purchases, not a regulatory comment.
Okay, yeah, no, granted, understood. Okay, I think Jeremy's going to come up and give us instructions. I think.
Any last thoughts?
Any last thoughts? Yeah, we have.
From you.
From me? Oh, no, I took lots of good notes, and I'm just looking forward to what we come up with the breakout sessions.
Okay, great. Can we thank our discussion leaders? All right, we have 6 breakout rooms that are the same exact rooms as last time. The topics have changed. The principles of our meeting have not changed. Let's see, I think we have the correct ones right here. Yep. Okay, so if you're interested in these 3, they're up at this level, 2 in this room, 1 down the foyer. And if you're interested in these 3 topics, 2 are in Monarch and 1 is downstairs. Now, I've been asked if you do want to go downstairs, go ahead and meet up with Kathy again, and she's at the registration desk. But I will ask her to hold on for a few minutes because it is a trek down there. If you haven't been there yet, it's very easy to get lost. So if you do want to go down to breakout room number 6, please wait in the back of the room, and I'll come back there and find Kathy for you guys, and we'll get an escort downstairs. Let's see, I do have a couple notes maybe. One thing I did want to challenge you folks, I think the comments have been really great, but if you can head into these breakout sessions listening as an active listener and perhaps come back, and some of the discussion could be about maybe what is your favorite thing that you heard someone else say during your breakout session. I think that might be a nice contribution as well, so we can have some more back and forth dialogue. But I think it's been great. The morning sessions have been awesome. Maybe I should take a vote. How many think the sessions have been going well overall? Give me the blue sheet. Have you enjoyed it and you've gotten a lot out of it? Okay. This just be a one question poll? One answer? The good answer? All right, who has some constructive feedback and would like to talk to me or have ideas about how we can improve? Which I'm fine with. Okay, that was a good poll.
Well, nobody wants to say that. Nobody's going to.
I'm available. Yes, sir.
Cool,
Okay, we got one in the
suggestions.
front. Okay, 2. All right, that's enough. That's enough. Nope. All right, with that said, if I had a note, I don't have it anymore. So, breakout room 6, meeting with
Wait, I
that.
have one note. So Joe has to leave partway through a session, although I already saw him walk out, but Hasib is going to fill in for that session for Joe because Joe has to take a flight. Yeah.
That's number 1.
Number 1, yeah, just so you know. Yep.
Okay, let's break and we will reconvene at 4 o'clock. Session leaders, breakout session leaders, please break at 3:45, and then we will reconvene here at 4. Thank you very much. All right, welcome back. Please take your seats. And we will get started with our afternoon session, 4 o'clock. We are reconvening to report out from the breakout sessions and form an action plan. All right, this discussion is 60 minutes. Will be led by Julie Cubb and assisted by Aloisio da Silva. And take it away.
Okay, so welcome back. What ended up happening for the last session is we had very few people in breakout session 1. So people from breakout session 1 ended up going to breakout session 2. And also Joe had to leave on an airplane anyways from the session leader 1. So we just have session leader 2 here to talk about what you had for your results from breakout number 2. And this was what testing do MNOs want?
I'm Farouk Ahmed Barazan. In my breakout session, there were 2 MNOs from the Accord program. And the summary I'm going to speak to is not the opinion of the MNOs. This is the opinion of the participants in the breakout session. So we had 4 questions that was posed to the breakout session participants. And the first one was how do MNO define performance parity? And this was their feedback. They think the MNO's performance parity, when MNO says performance parity, they mean parity with the traditional RAN, the non-open RAN. And they also want parity for throughput, spectral efficiency, uplink and downlink, and uplink and downlink volume as well. And performance in mobility, performance in energy consumption, parity with key KPIs that the MNOs see in the field. Accessibility is another one. And availability, which translates to mean time between failures of the equipment, stability, uptime of the equipment, manageability of the hardware, both the radio and the VDU, in terms of the granularity of exposure it provides to the hardware component itself. And quality of end user experience is another KPI measurement for performance. Resiliency was mentioned as another one. How does the equipment cope to failures? And the last one was software upgrade time and hardware reset time, meaning how long does it take to upgrade a certain piece of hardware from version N-1 to N? And also, if we were to reset the hardware for some reason, how long does it take for us to come back alive and on air in the network? And the second question was, what testing is most important now? This is what the audience in the breakout session told me. Top on the list was interrupt test, particularly M-plane, and then followed by conformance. And related to conformance is IoT profile of the multi-vendor scenario that's being tested. And the next one was performance. The uptime of the system, how long can the test system under test stay up while the test is being performed without crashing or breaking down. Security was another one, and one of the audience mentioned about over-the-air tests as well, in addition to a confined environment test in the lab. And third question was, what are the use cases for the MNOs? And this was the audience response. High traffic venues such as stadiums was top of the list, first mentioned, actually, not top of the list, first mentioned. NSA, non-standalone access. VONAR, non-terrestrial networks such as satellites and aerial. DSS and spectrum coexistence was another use case. Indoor environment, enterprise environments versus outdoor environments, macro environments. End-to-end slicing, including RAN slicing. Massive MIMO, mission-type communications such as RedCap and 5G and narrowband IoT, and CADM and 4G. Another point not related to actual use case was an important one, actually. Total cost of ownership was mentioned. And also RAN sharing was brought up as well. That's what the audience thought were the use cases for the operators in North America. The fourth question was, what part of testing MNO will do in their own lab? What the audience thought, MNOs will not outsource certain aspects of the test. And the top of the list was software rollout in the network and software upgrades on the network, which is a massive amount of sites. IoT with core that are operator specific. There are certain core elements that could be operator specific, which cannot be offloaded to other parties or other entities. Specific parts of hardware and software acceptance testing. There's be an acceptance testing process that every MNO would follow. There'll be specific parts of hardware and software acceptance testing that the MNO would not want to outsource. Load testing was another one. Device IoT is something that probably MNOs only can do. Feature testing. Every software release will come with hundreds of features, and those features are complicated features involving multiple radios, multiple equipment, multiple bands, into an impact. So that type of stuff can only be done in MNO lab is what the audience thought. And in environments where there are multiple apps doing multiple functions clustered in a, for lack of a better word, MNO environment, SMO environment, there has to be some conflict avoidance mechanism between the apps. One app is trying to push some parameters to optimize the network, while the other app sitting in the cloud is doing exactly the opposite, or trying to do exactly the opposite. So the conflict avoidance tests in this kind of scenarios can only be done in the MNO lab. KPI and performance field tests. The audience thought that it can only be done by the MNO. Specific aspects of hardware and software lifecycle management can only be done by the MNOs is what the audience thought. Example, end of life, end of service, that type of stuff can only be managed by the MNOs because it has commercial impact. Next, actions. 4 specific actions came out of the discussion. One was augment the test plan for performance testing. The audience thought was the test plans defined by several bodies in existence now need to be augmented. Define stability testing for hardware and software. How long can my hardware and software stay alive and working before it crashes or breaks? Breaks in case of software and fails in case of hardware. Define a channel model that reflects field environment. That was an important one, took a lot of time and discussion on that point. And also, what is the criteria that defines what is long-term and what is near-term for the MNO? It's where that's a summary of the conversation.
Okay, so did anybody take Jeremy up on the challenge of, did you hear anything in the session that somebody else said that you really liked? Those that went to session number 2? Or maybe you did such a good job of summarizing everybody.
I'm just reading PowerPoint.
Yeah, you even have a PowerPoint. I saw that. That's great. Wow. Yeah, I thought myself it was very thorough, everything that came up with. So how many folks in your session were MNOs?
So all of the group 1 came to group 2, so quite a crew there.
Yeah.
And a lot of questions and a lot of comments, suggestions as well.
You mentioned that you have 2 MNOs in your breakout section, right? I would like to hear what will be the recommendation from this MNO in terms of the OTIC testing, the interaction between the MNO direct with the OTIC in terms of the testing, repeatability, and consistency.
I'm going to have to offload that to my MNO partner.
Go to the mic for.
She's closer to OTIC than I am, so that's why I'm offloading to her.
Actually, Verizon and AT&T, as you know, Aloisio, were on a campaign to get OTICs built out in North America, and we have acted as co-host along with Dish for, Aloisio's testbed is an OTIC. We think the ORAN, Open Testing and Integration Center concept is a very strong foundation upon which we're building. And Julie, you probably heard me say, building means, benefiting from NTIA Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund and bringing in hardware, software that's typically not easily afforded by a university. A point I made, and I'm not talking in the AT&T voice, is a recent operator survey makes it abundantly clear that, testing, whatever it is obscenely expensive in a single vendor 5G system stack. With the introduction of Open RAN technologies, and not just third-party radio, multi-vendor R apps and X apps and different RICs, we're going to lean very heavily on the test and evaluation resources that are being built out on OTICs in North America and also on OTICs in other parts of the world. And we are already working, as you know, Aloisio, interconnecting OTICs in North America, coming up with a methodology to maintain and distribute open source reference designs. We can't do it in our own private, isolated labs anymore. It's just too complicated. And another problem is, expertise is becoming a scarce commodity, as you know. And you have some brilliant students, and they are the workforce of the future.
Tracy, you did mention about the open source reference architecture, right? And we all know that the majority of the MNOs, basically, they don't believe too much in the open source. What are your expectations? I know that I know the visions of AT&T, but can you share a little bit your expectation about how the open source end-to-end reference architecture, ORAN base, can support the development of the MNO testing and the OTIC?
So a few real quick case studies, not just AT&T. You may recollect from the old days, OpenROTM. OpenROTM started out, Open Daylight was the SDN controller framework. There was an open config and control focus group set up. It was all AT&T people who spearheaded it, and it was Linux Foundation. And then, of course, we found commercial partners. Fujitsu is one example, and it's ubiquitous in AT&T's network, not just AT&T's network. You'll see the same thing with layer 2 and layer 3 products that all of them were incubated in open source projects and are very much dependent on open industry standards. Our concern with this, this ORAN testing or Open RAN testing is we're going to be testing current generation commercial products against ORAN concepts, abstractions, or prototypes that aren't yet commercialized. How do we do that in a way that's reproducible if we don't have a library of open source reference designs? Like, I want to be able to bring in, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 ORUs and test them with Open Air Interface or SRS RAN or some other open source CUDU, and preferably do it over the internet, secure connection over the public internet, and have test automation from, Keysight and Viavi. Otherwise, we can't do it. We meaning, and I don't think I'm speaking for AT&T, I'm speaking for the people I know in the ORAN Alliance.
Good illustration. Thank you.
Okay. And I thought that was a great session. Breakout session 2.
Yeah, very, very thorough too. A lot of good information. I never actually had all the different aspects of performance parity defined to that level of detail. I really like those notes because now we have kind of a understanding of what we mean when we talk about that. I really quite like that. Okay, did we?
Anything else for me?
Yeah, is there anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Julie.
So much.
Thank you.
Yeah, very nice session. All right, so now, yep. Okay, so now we'll have breakout session 3 and 4 come up here. So Andreas and Doug. Okay, so as they're coming out, so just a reminder, breakout session 3 was how can we achieve and demonstrate consistent repeatable testing. Andreas led that one, and then Doug led session 4, which was how accurate do tests need to be and how large of differences are significant. So we'll start with Andreas, who is number 3. Once you get up here.
Yeah, so we were, I think, about 8 attendees. Not a lot, but we had a vibrant discussion. And I have to thank Carsten for taking most of the notes. Thanks. So we structured the discussion in 4 blocks, and hopefully we answered all your questions implicitly. But there was in the starting round, so we identified the need to discuss what is meant with consistency and repeatability, or consistent repeatable testing. And it's also a little bit of a continuation what we have discussed in the plenary before. So and what I liked most as proposals from the team is consistency across locations. That means different labs, time, different runs, test beds, so different test environment, and consistency according to the system under test configuration. So if we can achieve that, so that would be the best. So then we start with sharing our observations. So what is the state of the ecosystem concerning this consistency and repeatability? And we start with a very simple questions. And hey guys, if you can rank that from 1 to 10, 10 is the perfect repeatability and consistency, and 1 is almost nothing. Well, would you spontaneously answer? And so when it comes to conformance tests, unit conformance, so we end up between 2 and 4. So let's say on average 3.5. Not the best math, I have to say. And when we talk about rig testing and the apps, it's even lower. So, and then we discuss a little bit more those observations and what are the reasons why we are still at this number 3 or 3.5. And it's the definition of the environment, calibration rules, test specs, are not well defined to achieve this full exchangeability and repeatability. So it's also clear that we lack, and thanks for the breakout session 2 now, so we lack of use case definitions and requirements that are hardened between the different operators and agreed between the different operators. So, and there are also subject of our discussion multiple reasons for limited repeatability. So that is error margins for, there's a limit to repeatability because of error margins in the performance test specification itself. Low-level test case definitions with lack of details. And we must avoid this the false positive tests. So that was also an agreement that in the current setup we may see a lot of those false positive tests. So what are the potential areas of improvement? I must scroll here, sorry. So, and that was also based on the discussion we had before. So try out a peer review to validate where we are in this industry with regards to repeatability and reproducibility of the results. So then areas of improvement is improve the agreement between the operators, either via TIP, this MOU requirement, documents, or with other approaches. So there are other groups who are interested to work in that domain as well. And so then we had a discussion concerning whether we can help the community with standardized test tool configuration and to publish those standardized test tool configurations. And we even brought it to the point whether it would make sense to reach a level of exchangeability of the configuration files of the different test tools. So because the test specs, if you want to run the tests, lead to a specific configuration of TM500 or other test tools. And the question is whether it will be helpful for the community to exchange those config files. So our proposal is that test tool vendors, there is an initiative that they create some standard config files and standard scripts that can be utilized as a starting point for the labs. So, and the last point of discussion was how to demonstrate the next, this exchangeability and interoperability, this repeatability and consistency. We need to, and that's within the next 6 or hopefully 6 months. So first, define pass-fail criteria, including margins where needed. So then we agreed that margins may differ. Oops. Something is wrong with the Google Docs, so it always jumps. Margins will differ per deployment scenario, and there we need the help from the operators to define deployment scenarios and define the margins. And then we propose to run a trial of certifying a few reference solutions with multiple labs. So that means we hopefully can find RU vendor, DUCU vendors who are willing to work with a couple of labs. Then we run the tests in parallel and share the results, compare the results, and give feedback to the ecosystem. Then in consistency, what we have discussed during the plenary session, so create perhaps a government-like certification or currency in the ORAN alliance that can be similar to the TIP, Test and Validation Committee. In any case, an approach that is reviewing the documents, an approach that and an organization that is taking care about the quality of the test reports, etc. So, and finally, define a peer review process between the labs. So, and that's a call for action to the labs. So if a lab issues a conformance certificate, for example, please invite another lab to review the entire process. That's it.
Okay, great. And that kind of does a lot of summary for this whole entire session too, for the ways forward.
I'm not so sure.
I mean, there's the things that we started at the very beginning.
Yeah. So we started this morning.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. I mean, peer review, we talked a lot about that, quality of test results. Yes, several of those things. Does anybody have any questions or comments or things that really struck you?
I was wondering if you guys were able to come up, because you mentioned the error margins of performance, that's bad, right? When you are replicate the test and then you have the results, were you guys able to come up with some idea or approach how we can specify a lower bound or upper bound for the results?
Yeah, good point. So the first conclusion was that we must involve the operators because they consume the results and they must agree the error margins. And if not, so then I don't know, it might be kind of best practice between a couple of the advanced labs to agree on a first proposal and to release it to or analyze or tip and discuss it there.
Do you guys believe that the operator will have different requirements if a margin is established? Then maybe this margin can vary from operators to operators? Or if you say that the upper bound is 9 to 15, it will be valid for AT&T, it will be valid for Verizon.
No, I think one of the points that Andreas mentioned is that the margins depend on the use case scenario. So not necessarily depends on Verizon or AT&T. It depends on whether it's an outdoor macro cell or a small cell indoor or whatever kind of scenario. So, and I think we also had more discussions on like, what are these error margins? Are they created by misunderstandings or vagueness in test specs, or are they created by human error, or are they really just repeatability problems that the devices under test don't always have the same results when you run the test multiple times, which can happen over radio, for example. Yeah, so there is more in the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I guess we'll go to session 4 then.
Okay, we had a small group, so small at first that I went out on a recruiting mission that didn't produce any new recruits, but when I got back, we actually had a great conversation. In our group, we had a test system vendor with a great deal of experience in different product certification and testing realms, academic researchers, actually 3 people from government sort of representing different realms of research standards, and interestingly, mission agencies with very specific mission use cases. One of the things we talked about were the key questions to address, and as I foreshadowed at the group meeting before we left, one key issue was discussing the accuracy of what, and also for what purpose, right? Because, and we just sort of touched on it here, different use cases and different users groups will have different requirements for accuracy. So some of the key observation is the accuracy question breaks down to questions of accuracy of inputs. We've heard a lot about how detailed and accurate test specifications and test methods are. Test input configuration and scenario data is discussed quite a bit across many of the groups here. And issues, we listed it under accuracy, but it might be more accuracy and transparency about fully understanding IUT capabilities and their configurations. Another dimension of accuracy is about test execution. We've talked about that a lot. The quality and correctness of the test execution, the actual measurements and metrics accumulated during the execution of a test, and then being able to express measurements of uncertainty about those base results and measurements of the test. And then maybe the last dimension is test result accuracy, which are test verdicts, if it's that kind of test, and mapping individual results to the requirements of specific use cases. Related to what we were just talking about, we think that accuracy is different for specific use cases. And we talked a lot about, and in general, we talked a lot about the future of the testing ecosystem, but accuracy could be different in use cases for test program accreditation and calibration, where we could have synthetic curated data sets designed to address laboratory quality control, proficiency tests, test method validations. Those kind of very curated and constructed, purposely constructed test data sets could demand very high accuracy of the test results. It's a part of the quality control and calibration of the test program. There's the issue of standards conformance, where we're talking about the accuracy of tests for base standards conformance results to either base standards or maybe community profiles, basic performance and resilience results, but here the the parameters of accuracy would be defined by the SDO and would probably be more lenient in a way, right? Because whether you're going to declare a system conformant or not might be, have less tighter bounds than specific use case testing for various users or specific use cases. There, the bounds of accuracy should be defined by the users groups in their specific use cases. There might be specific profiles of functionality required by the systems, the test inputs, the parameters of the test configuration, if you will, the specific KPIs that are being looked at, and result determination. And there, the descriptions of those tests and the accuracy required ought to come from those users groups and use cases, whether it's M&O use cases, specific user groups, maybe government in general might have different requirements, and specifically for the folks who have mission-specific special purpose networks, they might have different, if you will, accuracy bounds or requirements. So for the plans to make progress, I think we need to walk before we run. And I think one of the things that complicates this discussion is that there are all these dimensions of purposes for testing, and we kind of just talk about it in, so far, one test program, sort of the ORAN Alliance OTEC process. And I think that one of the things we ought to do is begin to embrace that there are multiple use cases for testing, possibly different classes of test users and the processes. I had suggested before, there might be innovation testing and innovation labs, which are really out there providing, people have spoken to this earlier today, things like large-scale simulations of environments to test applications. This isn't product certification, right? It's product development and innovation testing. There's demonstration testing and market development. I think of that as sort of some of what goes on in PlugFest. And then there's product certification testing, right? And that is a different beast, if you will, that maps back to base standards with requirements and processes defined by the standards organizations, whoever they are. And then maybe there's another class of system integration and performance testing, which kind of embraces the separate user groups and use cases that would have their own profiles of exact functionality that needed to be tested, input configurations, if you will, test environments, and might even have their own description of test results or accuracy of test results that are needed. And I think conflating all of those into one conversation of testing kind of perpetually puts us in a bit of a rat hole. Related to that, there was and this kind of got off into the discussions of just the testing ecosystem. We need to develop a quality control program for the product certification labs, right? That was one distinct use cases of the testing. Having basic unit tests for test methods validation, proficiency testing, interlab comparisons, and regression testing of the test program is important. And for these other use cases that everyone agrees are important, like M&O requirements for testing, determine how those, what we sort of call large-scale system integration testing, could be conducted and who will define the parameters for it. It's not clear that it has to be the SDO that does that, right? Different groups could curate the profiles, they currently are possibly, and might describe, if you will, sort of the parameters of accuracy and the kinds of test results needed. That's it.
You know, I never really thought about the different classes of tests. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. You know, you kind of tend to think there's a test and it should have certain bounds and that should be it, but different classes and types of tests and what your purpose is, and that does affect the accuracy. That's really, I never quite thought of it that way.
One of the things that we agreed upon is, and then, you know, there was a discussion of the burden of having, you know, sort of more serious test program quality control accreditation and testing scenarios is that for the product certification part of that, you want that, because if you're not doing that and you have labs that are weak in that area that are issuing the same results under the same program, it devalues all of the test results, right? We're trying to build user assurance and acceptance of certain classes of test results. And maybe innovation labs need to be operating in a different realm, right? And they need to be able to provide the kinds of test tools that'll, present interesting scenarios to AI, ML driven, applications to vet them. And they don't need to be accredited necessarily for that. They need to provide services that are useful to their consumer base, their user base.
Yeah, very interesting. Does anybody who went to that session want to add anything or something that struck you or questions if you didn't go to the session?
You mentioned about the developer quality control program for certification, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned that maybe the SDOs can just contribute, but do you believe that there is a specific institution that needs to play a main role and establish or guide the creations of this quality control program? Is it an alliance? Who will be this institution that should play a main role?
For the issue of base standards conformance, I think it can be the SDO, and there are plenty of good examples of standards organizations doing that. For user groups, I mentioned a few examples today where the US government has gone out and defined a test program that has laboratory accreditation, interlab comparisons, the entire quality control program that we use for government procurement, right? It's a specific user group with specific requirements. Nobody wants a proliferation of test programs, so typically, or at least the way that we have done those in the past, is to highly leverage the industry-driven or SDO-provided test program and specify effectively the delta, right? For testing for our user group, here are the requirements that change, here are the tests that change. We run some test programs that have like a 90% overlap in specific test cases with an industry-driven voluntary program. But we tweak the ones we need to tweak for our requirements and their test results.
Interesting. Okay, anybody else? Well, we have 21 minutes left, so we might want to bring the next couple up so that we can then have a summary at the end. Thank you. Thank you for the. All right, so Ku session 5 and Bin for 6. Okay, so as they're coming up, just a reminder, session number 5 that Ku led was what test frameworks and automation are needed. Is my mic not good? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And session number 6 that Bin led is how can we gather, sanitize, and maintain test data? So go ahead, Ku.
Hello? Okay, good. Yeah, so we started off with just myself and TNE. We thought that this is going to be an easy session, but turned out that we got more than 10 very active participants. So we took like 12 pages of the notes. So I was just trying to summarize them. Again, thank you for all the folks who have joined us and contributed to this work. So we have updated the outputs of our discussion in the Google Docs that's been in the link that's been provided. So just trying to summarize them. So the team has got together and we looked at the test automation framework requirements that basically allows us to get to consistent, repeatable testing, not just in terms of automating tests for the sake of automation, but after you do test automation, can the results be reproducible? And then ranging from automating tests for conformance, interoperability, from a functional performance. But we have obviously Rakuten Mobile, Mitsu-san in the room as well, that basically reminded us that we need to look at things like security, capacity testing before deployment into their live environment, and then robustness, resilience, among other things. So the first thing that we came up with is in terms of we need high quality test cases. So clear documentation of input parameters, the preconditions, test configuration, test scenarios that includes a bunch of things like channel conditions, traffic models, subscriber models, velocity of the subscribers, right, when they're emulated in lab environment, the procedures and outputs. In terms of the input parameters, there was actually a specific example that was actually brought up in terms of like needing to specify the uplink and downlink slots location for TDD, right? If you're basically not specifying that, you're trying to compare the throughput between two G-Node Bs, whereby you got one system, basically the test automation script does not specify the downlink slots to be located higher versus the uplink slots, then obviously the throughput will be different. So you're automating the test case, but the results will be radically different. And then the other things like, for example, the carrier bandwidth, you will not be able to do side-by-side comparison with a one device under test for the G-Node B configured with a 5 megahertz carrier versus 10 megahertz or 20 megahertz. So the test result will matter a lot. And some of the test cases are written with parameters embedded in the text in description. So it's difficult to surface it, what are the parameters which are important to make sure that the input parameters are clearly specified. So because they are just difficult to identify. And then we talk about some of the test cases, the way they are written in terms of the modularity. So for example, some of the test cases are written with like UE numbers of up to 10. If the operator are basically saying that I'm trying to reuse the same test case, but wanting to increase the test case numbers, then it's not that obvious how the test case can be modular in that aspects. The second point is around the test case automation readiness. So some of the test cases are not written with automation in mind. It's like if you are trying to run through the test cases with manual testing, I think that's fine. But if you are trying to automate the test cases, then the test cases are not automation ready. Then we discuss as well in terms of like, where do you take test case automation? Some of the test cases are not automatable, right? For example, 3GPP, the SCARS test specification, TS33117, there are test cases that basically includes, taking out a USB drive and put it into a server. If you're trying to automate that, potentially you can try to develop a robot, right? That try to go across and look at, using some image recognition, look at the hole and stick in the USB stick. But, I think the team basically sort of recognizes that some of the test cases are not easy to automate, or maybe we automate as much as we can where it makes sense. And then in terms of automating some of the test cases which are developed for RIC AIML enabled use cases, especially needing to take into consideration the AIML model lifecycle management that includes the training of the models, the testing, evaluation, and validation. It may not be that straightforward, so the suggestion here is to consider starting a study on how to achieve consistent repeatable testing using test automation for the AIML enabled use cases, traffic steering, among other use cases. And then something that we brought up as well is in terms of like the test automation needing to ensure that you always have the same set of test cases selected, right? Consistent, set of test cases selected reliably. I think that would be important, because otherwise, even if you have test automation, if you basically would have two sets of systems selecting different test cases for the same device under test, it will not make sense. We have discussed as well in terms of like, we know that in a multi-vendor, even in a single vendor radio access network, there's always going to be changes, right? Whether this is configuration changes, software updates, and then this gets more complicated in terms of the rate of change in a multi-vendor environment. It will not be possible to rerun all the test cases, even with test automation, because test automation will still take time, right? If you change a parameter, it takes like 3 days, right, to go through all the test cases, because there are thousands of test cases. It will not make sense. So you need to be able to implement a smart selection that only rerun the test cases associated with the change. It may not be that easy, but this is something that needs to get done. So the smart selections, and perhaps, at a later phase, AML can be considered to be used for smart test cases selections. We discussed as well in terms of the test automation scripts are needing to be validated, right? Because if the test automation scripts are not validated for accuracy, consistency, and repeatability, then it cannot be trusted. And then the reference data sets or traffic models can be used here to make sure that the test automation scripts are being written correctly, so you can rely on the test results that it produces. The test automation are needing to include establishing the preconditions. So in other words, to be able to make sure that the device under test can be configured correctly, set up everything as as prescribed in the test cases, provided they are clearly documented, and then built-in sanity check before running the test cases, because otherwise you may spend time running through the test case and then you do not get the accurate test results. Then you got to go back, right, rerun the test case again, which is not worth the time. One thing that was actually quite interesting is that we always spoke about test automation, obviously needing to make sure that the test tools are correctly configured and the test scripts are right, executing the test case using the test tools. But quite a few test cases would actually require support from the device under test, right, in terms of configurability and observability. Like, for example, we listed 2 examples in the Working Group 4, ORAN Working Group 4 ODU conformance test specs. Some of the test cases basically requires the ODU to be configured, right? So if the O1 interface, for example, specified by ORAN Alliance, basically allows us to be able to control the ODU for the test case, I think that's fine. If the O1 is not supporting the configuration required to execute the test case, then you need to go through vendor-specific implementation, which is not that straightforward. And then there are other things like, for example, from an observability perspective, Working Group 4 front-haul interface from an M-plane perspective is encrypted. So if there's going to be logs which are like needed for verdicts or verification of the test results, then you need support from the device under test. So you need to dig into the device under test to be able to get the logs which are not encrypted. And then obviously the logs will be vendor specific in terms of the access and the formats of the logs. We discussed as well in terms of the flexibilities which are needed from the test automation script perspective, because there are different scenarios, KPIs and KPI values. And, Mitsu-san, for example, has mentioned that the operators would have more stringent criteria as compared to some of the standardized test cases requirements. Things like, for example, the availability, reliability, retainability as compared to general test results. His requirements may be that for this specific deployments, they may need availability for 99.99%, right? Because this could be something mission critical versus others. So the ability to make sure that the test scripts are flexible enough to be able to configure these values are important. The performance tests are needing guidance from the blueprints. So we discussed, for example, if you specify like, this base station will need to be able to be benchmarked with 500 UEs, but the 500 UEs may not be supported for that device under test, the G-Node B, because it's actually, designed for a private network, which may be supporting up to 100 UEs, for example, and it may not be suitable for the deployment. So the guidance from the blueprints, like for example, for the MVP profiles could be important for performance tests. And then we discussed also in terms of the capacity and soak tests are needing to be performed in the operator labs prior to field deployments. That's one of the test automation scenarios that needs to be supported. There was actually a good point brought up in terms of like when vendors, operators perform what we call the soak test. So there's a long duration test that you try to load the base station with like lots of UEs, very complex scenarios, right? You run it for 3 days, right, or 5 days, right? Then the device under test, the G-Node B, may actually pass the soak test for 3-5 days, but when they start to deploy to the field, whereby the operation time is actually longer than the test time, and the G-Node B crashes in the field, right? Because of memory leaks, for example. How do you detect those, right? Because the operation time is actually longer than the test time in the lab, and you will not be able to run the lab test for like, infinite duration. So there's some discussions about adding additional matrices for the soak test so that you can potentially look at how the memory consumption can be recorded, analyzed to detect potential memory leaks that could potentially help to prevent some of this from issues from leaking out to the field. And then exploring the test automation to include field to lab scenarios. So we talk about continuous integration, continuous deployment, and as well as continuous testing. It has to close the loop with the field. So when issues are basically occurring in the field, how do we bring the field conditions back to the lab, right? And integrate that into the test automation so they can try to reproduce issues which are leaked out to the field, and making sure that when you fix the issues, they're validated within a test automation framework in the lab environment before you deploy the fixes into the field. We spoke about in terms of the automation of security test cases as well. There were lengthy discussions within the team about security, obviously because it's important. So we talked about the portability of the test cases from an automation perspective so that the vulnerabilities associated with the base station can be detected. The automated test scripts can be sent to the end users for self-validation and report generation with potential recommendations on possible solutions before they are officially tested. Then we covered the part about test report generation. One good point brought up by Victor from ORE is that when we look at generating a test report, we discuss a lot about the ISO 17025 requirements. One key requirement is to be able to make sure that all the evidences are recorded for required traceability. So things like, for example, the screen captures, right? You need to be able to produce evidence when it comes to the verdict that you came to as per the test results reporting. So the test report generation as part of the test automation, we need to make sure that is doing that in compliance to the ISO 17025 requirements. And then it was discussed as well as that, when you start to look at testing a DU, the DU can be operating with or without accelerators, right? So obviously the performance will be different. So there's going to be additional requirements to make sure that test automation generate test reports that logs additional information that characterize the device under test. The machine readability of the test reports were basically brought up as well. In terms of the summary reports, the test result reports are straightforward because those are fields which are determined, but in terms of the detailed test reports with things like pictures, graph, and free-form text are less straightforward. And they're needing to be reviewed to see whether advanced technologies like, digitizer, image recognition can help. The automated root cause analysis are important. So for conformance functional tests, I think root cause analysis can be quite straightforward. But we start to look at things like stability tests, long-term tests, soak tests, and stuff like that. And in the lab and extended to field deployments, the automated root cause analysis as part of the test automation framework will be key. And the team discussed as well in terms of like potentially using AI/ML assisted techniques for automated root cause analysis. Would be important, especially when you have a multi-vendor test setup that, you want to avoid finger pointing as much as possible.
Ku, I hate to interrupt.
Yeah.
We have
Sorry about it, yeah.
I just have a time check of 7 minutes left and we still want Bin.
Yeah.
And the policy folks are kind of getting ready for me to go over to them. So do you have kind of some overall next steps and then maybe we could go to Bin. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no
You'll have
worries.
all that in the Google Doc, so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So sorry to take up so much time. Just we had lengthy discussions, right? So I think in terms of
great information.
the recommendations, I would say, is in terms of making sure that we have high quality test cases, making sure that the again clear documentation of the input parameters and all these things as we have discussed early on. The automation readiness, I think we've covered those already. I think everything that I've actually spoke about are key recommendations that we would like to share with the team. Right, so I don't want to go through them again, but they are documented in the Google Docs.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's wonderful information. I hate to cut you off, but I just want to make sure Bin.
No, thank you for a reminder.
Make sure we don't delay the policy folks either. So
yep, sure. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, you have 6 minutes, Bin.
Yes, I should be able to wrap it up fast. We had a small group, although we had one of the coziest room. Okay. Yeah, so let me try to give a quick report. Yeah, so we start with listing some of the potential concerns that prevent people from sharing the data. Yeah, so for example, if the involved device vendors, so usually when they come to our test lab, there's some NDA being signed. So whenever we want to share some data associated with a particular vendor, we're always very careful about that. Especially it's regarding some very sensitive information like performance or energy efficiency or security issues. And I think there's quite different from, for example, when we're testing some consumer or off-the-shelf devices, right? Like PC Magazine always put its benchmark that no issue with publishing that. So I think there's some cultural difference there. And also we talk about the concern from MNO. I think, NK came from AT&T, he moved to university, he see the big difference of the availability of data. But from MNO, I think they are kind of regulated. There are some user privacy concerns, and there's a business interest or lack of business interest concerns. And another thing that we discuss about is when we share data, right, there's always some IP and licensing concerns. For example, like in the collaboration with Japan OTIC, with Kisai, we develop some test scripts. But when we want to share that, it will be a bit complicated because some of the IP may be kind of involve the contribution from all the three parties. We need to get green light from all the three parties before we can share that. Yeah, so, and also there's some discussion about whether what is the proper sanitization approach to be applied before we publish the data. Then there's some potential leverage and kind of low-hanging fruit, I think we can start with. For example, we generally agree that if the data is based on open source projects, I mean, this should be quite easy to share compared to those from commercial vendors. And also, I think earlier someone mentioned that if the data is collected from those research testbed funded by government fundings, that should be easier. And also, if we're just sharing some samples, that should be easier. And we also quickly map out some potential action items. One of the key things I think is a very good suggestion is that we should really come together and list down what are the data we really need, what to be used for. I mean, all the kind of data as detailed as possible that will be needed for what kind of use cases, and in which kind of format, including the metadata, and also the scale that will be needed. I mean, to make the use case reasonable. And also, we can try to compile the list of data that are already available in the public domain. For example, we actually identify some particular dimension data. For example, the sales side data for some countries, the mobility trace for some cities. All these are available already. And maybe you can use ML to kind of compose them together to see whether they're good data. But I guess the thing is that we don't need to aim at the perfect. We just look at what we have and try to make some reasonable benchmarks. And we also recognize the importance to recognize the contribution from the organization who share the data. So there should be some mechanism designed to give the credit or give some incentive to encourage such sharing. And regarding the mechanism to share, I think maybe if the data can be shared with public, then maybe the easiest just to share via the owner's own website or via some public repository like GitHub or Kaggle. And also, if you want to do some access control, you can also kind of just provide the email and then they can request and maybe sign up fill some form before you share data. And also, if it's to share with ORAN members, I think we can also try to tap on some ORAN's current infrastructure, for example, the ORAN wiki. But there are some kind of confidential, non-confidential terms that we may need to be clarified with ORAN. And also, there's some pairwise sharing that probably will be governed by the NDA other agreements. Yeah. Okay, so that's a quick summary.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, we're coming back to this idea of what could we put together at the end of this workshop for ORAN Alliance, specifically, you mentioned the wiki, and that could be one, and that's one of the things I'm going to report out to the policy group. That might be a good overall, what can we take from this? All right, does anybody have any last minute comments? Because the policy group wants to come in and give you a summary, and I'm going to go over to the other room. We didn't quite have enough time to go through more conclusions, but I took some notes and I'm going to highlight that to them. Okay, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll look forward to all the notes on the Google Doc.
Right, thank you, team.
Thank you so much.
Do I need to go with you or just you?
All right, for our last session of the day, we are going to transition. They're just finishing up the policy, the last panel. And Julie, you're going to go straight over there. Okay. All right, and we will have Kate Dimsdale from NTI's Office of International Affairs coming over here very briefly. I think we have 1 or 2 minutes before the top of the hour. And she will give a policy track summary. And we have some plenty of time for Q&A, so don't hold back. And if we end a little early, great. But we have about 30 minutes for this next session. So please bear with us. Oh, here she is. Just a slight momentary pause. Welcome to Kate Dimsdale.
Sorry, I don't know why I went this way. It's been a long day. There are stairs right over there. Who knew? Okay, awesome. So hello, everyone. As Jeremy said, my name is Kate Dimsdale. I am a telecoms policy specialist with NTIA, the Office of International Affairs in particular. And so do all things policy all day long, lots of writing, lots of kind of talking with different governments and different kind of industry and academia partners about what's the latest and greatest and how my conversations with governments might support the industry and the latest and greatest actually see the daylight. So I am here to talk about the policy session that we had today. It was super fun, took a lot of notes. We definitely took a different kind of approach In that we had a couple of panel sessions in the beginning of the day. We started with a brief kind of overview and scene setter on like a reminder for my policy friends that may not be as steeped in kind of open network architectures more broadly on the day-to-day about what Open RAN is and why it matters. And then, of course, we also kind of talked about yesterday and the conversations that we had in plenary. And then we heard from the Czech Republic's cybersecurity agency, NUKIP, and they unfortunately weren't able to make it to the IORS this week, but they pre-recorded remarks, and they were essentially really important partners for us in establishing the 2021 Prague proposals on telecommunications supplier diversity, which you may or may not have heard of. Probably not, but essentially they're a set of kind of high-level principles or suggestions for governments that are interested in kind of promoting telecom supplier diversity, Open RAN more broadly, on things that governments can do. So like things like incentivizing R&D, financing, establishing policies and regulations that are like amenable to smaller and medium-sized enterprises, things along those lines. And so those principles were established at the 5G security conference, cybersecurity conference in Prague in 2021. And so hence the name of Prague proposals on telecommunications supplier diversity from NUKIP in the Czech Republic. And then after that, we had like a panel to kind of talk about how the proposals have been implemented by different governments. And so the panel included folks from DoD's Future G team, ITRI in Taiwan. I really should know what that stands for by now because I talk to them all the time, but I don't. And then we also had Canada's Innovation, Science, Education Development Agency, ISED. Is VU in the room? Thank you, economic, go VU. So we also had ISED on the panel as well, and DCIT. And so these kind of four panelists talked a lot about kind of some of the bilateral and multilateral engagements that we've had on these proposals. And then we also kind of took it back to my old job and area of expertise in terms of capacity building and training and building out workforce, a workforce that can kind of create and manage these networks. And so we had a capacity building panel. It included colleagues from the U.S. Agency for International Development, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, the Asia Open RAN Academy in the Philippines, which has been like one of USAID's biggest successes when it comes to kind of putting together a curriculum for engineers that are in college or even existing engineers from operators that need kind of some upskilling. And our commercial law development program folks. We also had someone from Japan's JBIC. I should know what that stands for as well. Japan's financing agency. And so it was a really interesting panel in the sense that in order to support workforce development and broader capacity building, I think you have to have money. So that's why JBIC was there. You have to have kind of technical expertise and assistance. And so that's why USAID and USTDA were there. And you also have to have the local folks from universities or from like the MNOs or whomever involved so that you're making a curriculum that actually means something and actually has like the relevant kind of details to it to be useful. Bueno, and then in the afternoon, we heard from a couple of different folks in the private sector, including Intel, Docomo, TELUS, and that was a kind of private sector panel talking about the latest and greatest in terms of how different vendors are approaching different components and how different vendors are engaging with different kind of governments around the world. Definitely focus a lot on what governments could be doing better, could be doing more of to support the industry. And then we also had a panel on standards bodies, which is like an area that is just way over my head. But it was really useful in terms of like getting a crash course on how important standards bodies and standards engagement is for the industry and just for governments as well to be kind of involved in. Let's see. Awesome. And then after that, we did our first breakout sessions. And I understand that y'all were doing breakout sessions basically all day. So I'm sure you're exhausted, lots of talking. But we did a breakout session based on kind of the four main areas of the PROG proposals on telecommunications supplier diversity. So investment, policy, international cooperation, and testing and research and development. And so those four kind of breakout sessions were led by different folks. We had the investment track led by the Development Finance Corporation, DFC, from the US, our kind of financing, one of our financing agencies. My colleague Brian Larkin led the policy conversation. And then Tom Rumbelow from the UK's DCIT led the R&D and testing conversation. And Alex Botting from the Open RAN Policy Coalition led the policy conversation. Sorry, y'all, I'm very tired. So for investment, I think they talked a lot about, and I just heard this, so I wrote it down, so I might read a little bit. But for the investment breakout session, they talked a lot about the hurdles for vendors to make the testing environment easier for them kind of to access, especially for small and medium enterprises, and the need for like financing, liquidity. I think in the policy session, they talked about kind of three primary phases. So challenges, policy solutions, and mechanisms. Challenges included kind of overcoming the either perceived risk or actual risk in terms of like financial dependency on incumbent vendors or vendor lock-in and dependency created around kind of workforce development. And then for policy, they talked about kind of essentially what I mentioned at the beginning, right? Like what governments can do to put together policies and regulations that are helpful for SMEs, for small and medium enterprises, for incumbent vendors as well, but also like the broader ecosystem more broadly. And then they also touched a little bit on kind of things like spectrum and spectrum policy, alignment, and again, spectrum goes way over my head, so I won't get into too many details on that. And then testing and R&D, I think they talked a lot about the need for greater centralization and coordination on testing. I think also the need to have like a lot more openness in terms of like the data that's being shared. I think last week at the Berlin Open RAN Working Week and I14Y Summit, I heard that kind of time and time again that like a pass-fail score isn't super helpful when you're looking to kind of coordinate testing. It's really more about like the actual data that comes out of the testing and being able to replicate that. Not sure what you all think about that, but seems like a fair argument to me. And then on international cooperation, I think we talked a lot about like multilateral engagement. So organizations like the Global Coalition on Telecommunications and working through things like the G7 and the Quad, and how like GCOT, for instance, the Global Coalition on Telecommunications can kind of have more visibility and kind of pool with other country governments to incentivize more governments kind of getting involved in the open network architecture ecosystem or open RAN ecosystem, depending on what phrasing you prefer. Bueno, so I think that's the high level kind of takeaways from the policy session today. Tomorrow we're going to the Orchid Lab at DISH, and I think a few folks from the technical track will also be joining. So looking forward to that, and hope that you all have fun in the breakout sessions tomorrow. Hope you guys aren't too tired of talking. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Jeremy. Or do you have questions? Sorry. No. Okay. Totally fair. It's 5:11. I mean, I get it. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much. And back to Jeremy. I will take the stairs off.
All right, I guess I should keep it short too. Thank you to our virtual audience. We appreciate you tagging along, and hopefully you got some good stuff out of today as well. That does conclude day 2 of our event. Thank you to all of our discussion leaders and everybody who participated. And since, as Kate mentioned, tomorrow is the ORCID tour, for most of us, this is the last opportunity to really engage and network with our policy colleagues. So I encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. We have the space here. And so please, enjoy the opportunity to engage with each other. I think that's it. So that concludes day 2. Tomorrow we will reconvene at 9 a.m. And everyone have a great evening. Thank you so much.